This podcast video was originally recorded at the home of Robert and Nena Thurman, September 2018 in upstate New York. To learn more about the work of Robert Thurman, please visit bobthurman.com.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm today going to do a commentary on a specific chapter of the Vimalkirti Sutra. And just for convenience, I'm using the version that I have in the book, published from Penn State University Press, although I'm not promoting that. I mean, you could probably still find it. I think it's still in print. But I'm promoting, or I'm mentioning, you can get it free online from the 84,000 translation program, Words of the Buddha it's called, the 84,000 project, which is a project that I love and I support, and where I donated since I have the rights for my own translation of the Vimalakīrti, what's called the Vimalkirti Sutra. Literally it's called the Sutra taught by the Vimalakīrti. And it's a little bit modified in the online version that is free in the reading room of the 84,000 project. Just go to 84,000.org, I think is what it's called. And, or you just type 84,000 and it'll direct you there. And you can use that version, so you don't have to buy anything. If you're one who likes the book, you can buy this book. And this is the reason I want to do a commentary on this chapter today, is I'm doing a commentary on cool heroism, and I'm doing a series of podcasts on that, and also inviting others to come and talk about it. And it's something I came up with in my Inner Revolution book, which was my first trade book, as they call it, or popular book, as academics call it, although I don't know how popular it was. It was a bestseller in certain markets, let's say. And it's done pretty well. It's still in print, and it's also on ebook. But in that, I came up with the theory of the Buddhist movement as a cool revolutionary movement, and that the type of revolutionary heroism that its protagonists pursued and developed is a heroism that is not violent, that just proceeds by morphic resonance, that makes the practitioner of the Dharma feel better, more realistic, more in tune with the basic positive reality of nirvana in the world, and feel more blissful, and therefore naturally attracts friends and is nice with them, and therefore increases their circle. And eventually this institutionally fits with the Buddhist community, and then this expands and it changes societies, and it becomes revolutionary, making them less violent and more friendly and more happy and more joyful and with more beautiful arts and so forth, and also liberating women more, which makes life more beautiful and less militaristic. And but unfortunately, up until the present day, also societies that went that way, like ancient India, many different societies, and there are many societies in India, but many of them, and then like Tibet and Mongolia more recently, such society, and indirectly China, Korea, Japan, societies that do turn that way become more vulnerable and less militarized, and so they've tended to disappear in history, and people have wrongly thought that being more open and more happy and more compassionate and more cool in your heroism, rather than hot heroism of militarism, but being more cool makes you vulnerable and is bad for you, therefore. And in a way that we have to admit that there has been a historical process of that type. However, in the long run, and today, when militarism is itself the problem, and no one can win a war, and they're just flailing and destroying everything, we have paradoxical, stupid things of people like Mr. Assad, helped by Mr. Putin, destroying Syria in order for him to keep control of a destroyed thing rather than a real country. And that shows that it's just completely useless, this violent way, and that everyone has to develop cool heroism on every side for everyone to win, and everyone conquering themselves. Okay, so then anyway, that briefly goes into that theory. And so when I was promoting that book, A Cool Revolution, at one point in some interview, someone asked me, well, where's all the cool heroes today? You mean Gandhi, Martin Luther King, etc., a few people who themselves got shot? What do you mean? What use? Why are you promoting that? And I wasn't even as clear then and as frank about the fact that even whole societies like Tibetans were crossed by Chinese communists, Mongolians by Russian communists, and other countries by colonialists in general. In Asia, other more peaceful countries in Asia by colonialists. So I didn't even go to that level, but I was like a little bit gasping for thing. And then I suddenly had a revelation which I too stupidly hadn't really noticed deeply enough, although I knew it sort of intellectually. But I thought about women in every family throughout the whole planet who are the cool heroes that hold that family together. Because the men in the family in violence-oriented societies, that is to say militarism or societies, even a nation as defined by political science as where the government has the monopoly on legal violence in its borders. So even a nation is defined by the ownership of violence, as if it's an inevitable thing. And but nevertheless, the families in that, and in many cases the societies, are held together by the glue of the peaceful warrior, the woman, who often gets brutalized, actually, but she also mutes the brutality between father and son, brother and brother, which son and father, which will tear families apart. And, societies would be unviable without the presence of those grandmothers and those mothers and those wives and those sisters. It would be unviable. And so they actually are the cool heroes, and they are therefore actually 50% of humanity, which my interviewer couldn't deny, actually, as I finally couldn't deny it to myself. So even I had translated this chapter, but I still took me a moment of stress to realize that in a certain way and fit it with my theory. So anyway, this chapter begins, it's called the Goddess chapter, and it's number 7 in the printed version, and it's number 6 because they changed the chapter numbering in the 84,000 online version. And it begins with a long conversation. The whole teaching of Vimalakirti is he's an enlightened layperson who's almost as eloquent as the Buddha himself and as deep a teacher, but he's a layman, so he's a lower in status. But he's a friend and partner of the Buddha. He doesn't compete with him. And he defers to the Buddha because the Buddha, by dropping out of the social system, has put the creative community into a kind of tension with the social system to engage the revolution. And whereas Vimalakirti is doing it within a great city there called Vaishali, and from within, as a layperson within the system. But yet he always, he's always like contributes from that angle. So he and Buddha are like two sides of an anvil, anvil and hammer situation, So anyway, he and Manjushri, who is the bodhisattva of perfect wisdom, are having a conversation about the nature of the reality of beings. And he says, well, the way that the enlightened person, a bodhisattva, regards beings as a little bit unreal. Quite unreal even, in the sense that they don't know who they are, the ordinary being, and what they think they are, what their reality is not what their real reality is, because they think their reality is something that suffers and something that's frustrated, something that's separate from the universe, whereas what they really are is a being of bliss, made of bliss, in a blissful universe, completely free and exquisite and beautiful. And inner bliss is what their life force is even. But they don't know that, so therefore they're freaking out a lot. So he gives a talk like that. And so then Manjushri does the logical thing. He says, well, if a bodhisattva considers all living beings in such a way as sort of unreal, how does he generate the great love toward them? How can he love them? And then he says, Manjushri, when a bodhisattva considers all living beings in this way, he thinks, just as I have realized the Dharma, which makes me realize the relative unreality of suffering and suffering beings as suffering beings. It doesn't mean they don't exist, it just means they have a certain level of unreality. And that made me happy when I realized that our suffering is unreal and our bliss is what's real. That's what he's saying. So should I teach it to living beings, he says. Thereby, he generates the love so that they will realize what their real reality is, and they'll really be happy, which is what love wants people to do. Love wants the beloved to be happy. So how can you make beings happy? You cannot make them happy in a lasting way just by giving them this and that, unless you give them the ability and the circumstances and the evidence and the vision, the opportunity for the vision to see themselves as happy and to understand where their happiness is, which is already within them. That's how you do it. And then that gives them lasting happiness, And, it's like, as they say, the difference between giving someone a fish or teaching them how to find the fish themselves. So, thereby he generates the love that is truly a refuge for all living beings. The love that is peaceful because free of grasping. The love that is not feverish because free of passions. The love, because it is passion, so it's not driven by passion. The love that accords with reality because it is equanimous in all three times. The love that is without conflict because free of the violence of the passions. The love that is non-dual because it is involved neither with the external nor the internal. The love that is imperturbable because totally ultimate. Because it's a love that sees the happiness in beings as already there and wills them to discover it themselves, which will make them permanently happy and fully happy and inexhaustibly happy. Then he goes on, I'm skipping because I want to come to the love that is enlightenment because it is unity of experience. There are many great descriptions of love in this passage. So then he says, that's such great, so he says, the love that is happiness because it introduces living beings to the happiness of the Buddha. Such Manjushri is the great love of a bodhisattva. So Manjushri accepts that beautiful passage. And then he says, well then, Vimalakīrti, Mr. Vimalakīrti, what is the great compassion of the bodhisattva? And then it is the giving of all accumulated roots of virtue to all living beings. So any virtue, any good thing you do, you share that with beings. Then he says, what is the great joy of the bodhisattva? He says, it is to be joyful and without regret in giving. And then he says, what is the equanimity of the bodhisattva? And he says, it is what benefits both self and others. So these are, this love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, these are what are called the four immeasurables in any kind of Buddhism. And they are states of magnanimity and greatness and happiness. And they sort of intensify, and love fits with compassion, which can't bear for the beloved to suffer. Compassion fits with joy, which sees the bliss and happiness in the beloved, even though the beloved may not yet be fully aware of it. And then equanimity means where one sees this equally in all beings, so that one wants all of them to find that joy that is their basic nature. And so he gives them. Then he says, and then even you're equal yourself with others in your joy. That's about equanimity. So to what should one resort when terrified by fear of life? Which ordinary beings often are. And he says, Manjushri, a bodhisattva who is terrified by fear of life should resort to the magnanimity of the Buddha. Or where should he who wishes to resort to the magnanimity of the Buddha take his stand? And Vimalakirti says, he should stand in equanimity toward all living beings. Where should he who wishes to stand in equanimity toward all living beings take his stand? He should live for the liberation of all living beings. Oh, and what should he who wishes to liberate all living beings do? He should liberate them from their passions. How should he who wishes to eliminate passions apply himself? He should apply himself appropriately. How should he apply himself to apply himself appropriately? He should apply himself to productionlessness and to destructionlessness. That is, by seeing the true infinite joy and bliss and clear light and relative nature of all things, realize that nothing is ever, no isolated, intrinsically separated thing is ever produced, and therefore no thing can ever be destroyed. What is not produced and what is not destroyed? Evil is not produced and good is not destroyed, he says. Evil is not produced and good is not destroyed, meaning evil only comes from some being that thinks that it is separate from other beings and feels therefore frightened of them, or wants to dominate them, or wants to consume them, or get them under its control, and therefore is harmful to them, which is what evil is. And good is never destroyed, because good comes from the feeling of connection between all beings. And once you're connected to all beings, you can never harm them. So that's very simple in a way, but very nice. So then he says, Manjushri says, what is the root of good and evil? And he says, and this is surprising, he says, materiality is the root of good and evil. And by materiality, he means the grasping of something as materially separate and apart from everything else is what he really means by it. You know, rather than fluidity, interconnectedness. This is the material thing, this is me, this is separate, you know. And he says, what is the root of materiality? And he says, well, greed is the root of materiality. And what is the root of desire and attachment? And he says, unreal construction is the root of desire. Meaning, when you unreal construction of yourself as a separate thing, needing other things, but because you feel separate from them, so you feel you need them in this artificial, reaching across separation way, and then you become you become greedy for them. And what is the root of unreal construction? The false concept is the root. And what is the root of the false concept? Baselessness. It says, or rootlessness, you could say. And what is the root of baselessness? And he says, Manjushri, when something is baseless, how can it have any root? Therefore, all things stand on the root which is baseless. So in other words, the sense of being rooted in some fixed thing apart from other things, you are rooted in a sense of emptiness or baselessness, which then makes you connected to all things. Your root is your connection to all things, and basically he's saying like that. But anyway, this is a very deep dialogue in any language. The Zen people and the Taoists in China really loved this when it was translated like this. But anyway, that's just to give the atmosphere of where then the action takes place that I'm really reading about my ideal cool hero in one way. Thereupon a certain goddess who lived in that house, having heard this teaching of the Dharma of the great heroic bodhisattvas, and being delighted, pleased, and overjoyed, manifested herself in a material body, and showered the great spiritual heroes, the bodhisattvas, and the great disciples with heavenly flowers. She comes and scatters celestial flowers, really exquisite ones, they're with great scent and everything. So anyway, then I will compress this. So then the monks who are there are upset having flowers scattered on them, which are sticking to their clothes and their robes. Because as monks, they're not allowed to wear ornaments or flower garlands and things like that. So they're shaking them off, but they're sort of sticking to them by like electricity, static electricity. And the other bodhisattvas, they're just flowing over them and there's no problem. So then the goddess says to Shariputra, the head monk, why are you shaking your robes and acting all crazy? And he says, well, I'm doing that because the flowers are not proper. And she says, Shariputra, it's improper for one who has renounced the world for the discipline of the accurately taught Dharma. The teaching about reality consists of constructed thought and discrimination, and yet you elders are full of such thoughts, even though you think you attain nirvana. One who is without such thoughts is always proper. And then they go on like that, you know. But in other words, she challenges his sort of rigid conceptual structuring of reality, where he is a monk who has found a place to escape through meditation from structured reality, the way he structures it, where he thinks it's a veil of suffering and of improprieties. And she's saying, no, it's your construct of the world that's at fault there, even your construct of nirvana and samsara being separate. She's going to get to that. But she starts here, and then he protests. And then when she makes a point by showing his wrong rigidity and discrimination, and he changes the subject like male chauvinists always do. And then he says like, well, how long have you been in the house? Living here in this house of Vimalkirti, because she was invisible before this, because she's like a goddess, you know. And he said, well, I've been here as long as the elder has been in liberation of nirvana, she says. And then he goes, well, then have you been in the house for quite a while? Because of course he thinks he did have a magnificent meditative experience of being in a vast space as if it was apart from the world, and he thinks that's what nirvana is, because in a dualistic way. And she knows that, and so she's saying, well, how long? And then he says, he doesn't want to say a specific time, but he says, have you been here for quite a while? And then the goddess said, oh, has the elder been in liberation of nirvana for quite some time? At that, the elder Shariputra felt silent. And then she challenges, however. She doesn't go for the silence. She says, elder, you are said to be foremost of the wise. Why do you not speak? Now when it is your turn, you do not answer my question. And then he said, well, since liberation is inexpressible, goddess, I do not know what to say. In other words, this state that I achieved is inexpressible, and it felt inexpressible when I achieved it. And then I returned from it, I don't know why, but therefore I can't say anything about it. But I'm thinking it's there, and I'm here. But he's not saying that. But this. So then she says, don't take a resort to inexpressibility. She says, all the syllables pronounced by the elder have the nature of the liberation of nirvana. So language is not separate from nirvana, is what she's saying. Why? Liberation is neither internal nor external, nor can it be apprehended apart from the internal and the external. So there's no separation, in other words, no separate state of bliss apart from this state of supposed suffering. Likewise, syllables are neither internal nor external, nor can they be apprehended anywhere else. Therefore, Reverend Shariputra, do not point to liberation by abandoning speech. Why? The holy liberation is the equality of all things. Then he challenges, he argues back. He says, Goddess, is not liberation the freedom from desire, hatred, and folly of ignorance? And she says, quote, liberation is freedom from desire, hatred, and folly, end quote. That is the teaching for the excessively proud, i.e. you, because you're so proud of yourself, you think you achieved nirvana, you see. And you put that in your discriminatory structure as being something beyond the universe, and yet it's a state that you experienced, and you broke into it. So it had a boundary, and now you're back out from it, back in a world that's ordinary. So that's your discrimination, she said. So then you're proud, but then you think there's some, here you're caught up in desire, hatred, and folly, but there you won't be, you'll be free of that in that other place. But until you've only absolutized your experience. But she doesn't say this in all so many words, she just says, but those free of pride are taught that the very nature of desire, hatred, and folly is itself liberation. So in other words, liberation is even in seemingly negative emotions, if you understood them. If you understood what those energies truly are, not when you're gripped by them and driven by them to do stupid, greedy, or angry, or depressed things, but when you know what they are, and you realize that even they are made of this bliss, because nirvana is the uncreated, beginningless nature of everything anyway. But she doesn't say it so extreme. She just says, then he agrees with her, though. He sort of senses this is correct. He says, excellent, excellent goddess. But then again, he changes the subject. He says, pray, what have you attained? What have you realized that you have such eloquence? And she says, I have attained nothing, Reverend Shariputra. I have no realization, and therefore I have such eloquence. Whoever thinks I have attained, I have realized, is overly proud in the discipline of the well-taught Dharma. So great, And then he says, then again he changes in a way indirectly, but he's kind of trying to get her story. He says, Goddess, do you belong to the disciple vehicle, or the solitary vehicle, or the great vehicle? In other words, to the dualist vehicles of the disciples and the hermit Buddhas, or do you the great vehicle of the bodhisattvas, the non-dual great vehicle? She says, I belong to the disciple vehicle when I teach it to those who need it. I belong to the solitary sage vehicle when I teach the 12 links of dependent origination to those who need them. And since I never abandoned the great compassion, I belong to the great vehicle, as all need that teaching to attain ultimate liberation of nirvana, she says. So that shows again that the non-dual form of, the non-dual ultimate form of Buddha's teaching does not negate his preliminary forms, which are still dualistic, but some people need them, whatever they need. It's not dogma Buddhism, it's therapy. So whatever people need. And then she goes on, yeah, but really, it's always wonderful things here, and really the universal vehicle, the great vehicle, is really the great one, and that's the one I really like. And these 8 wonderful things are here in the house of Vimalakīrti. She tells, but I'm going to skip this because it'll be too long if I do it. But it's quite beautiful, actually. What she describes as the house of Vimalakīrti is actually what happens in a mandala. A golden hue shines there consequently. Anyone who enters there has no sort of disturbance from his inner addictive passions and emotions. The gods are all present here, and they're blessing everyone here. The sounds of all the gods are there. The gods. Don't think Buddhism doesn't have gods. They are. They're all there. All the great Buddhas and Bodhisattvas also. Yeah, it's never empty of. It has a great soundtrack, great sound system. The sounds of the Dharma are always there. It's a music of that type. Also, there's regular music. You always hear the rhythms, songs, and musics of gods and men. And now there are also 4 treasures in the house, replete with every jewel, which never decrease, although the poor and the wretched may partake to their satisfaction. That's the 6th strange and wonderful thing. And then also Buddhas of all the 10 directions will come to the house, and they will teach the secrets of the Tathagata, the esoteric teachings of the immediacy of enlightenment, and then depart. That's the 7th one. And finally, all the splendors of the abodes of the gods and all the splendors of the fields of the Buddhas shine forth in this house. And that's the 8th strange and wonderful thing. And Shariputra, these 8 things are here. So who then, seeing such inconceivable things, would believe the teaching, dualistic teaching, that bliss and beauty and liberation and nirvana is somewhere else when you live in a mandala house like this, she says, you know. So then finally, he loves that too, because he's in the house. After all, they're having this conversation in Vimalakirti's magical house. It's like a Doctor Who house, Vimalakirti's house, like a TARDIS. This looks like a regular house on the street in the city of Vaishali, you know, with its garden around it, so the big mansion. But inside, it's infinite, and there's infinite numbers of rooms, and it's huge, and thousands of people can go in, etc. It's a magic house like that. It's a shunyata house containing all of relativity, you could say, an emptiness house. And so he's in there, so, you know, in a way, he loves that she talks about these 8 strange and wonderful things that are always in the great vehicle house of Vimalkirti. So then he says, Goddess, which is, and that's admitting that she's obviously supremely enlightened herself. She's a female Buddha herself, but then he says, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? He says, because to him and in male chauvinist societies, even in the language, the female embodiment is a lower embodiment, and like the lower being, they say. The lower human is the female. Really, that's in all these patriarchal languages, even in Sanskrit, you know, even in Tibetan, it is in there. You know, and she says, although I have sought my female state for these 12 years, I have not found it. So she's not identifying herself as female, intrinsically, really female. Reverend Shariputra, if a magician were to incarnate a woman by magic, would you ask her, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? Shariputra says, no, such a woman would not really exist. Would not really exist. So what would there be to transform? So she says, just so, Reverend Shariputra, all things do not really exist. Now would you think, what prevents one whose nature is that of a magical incarnation from transforming herself out of her female state? Thereupon the goddess employed her magical power to cause the elder Shariputra to appear in her form and to cause herself to appear in his form. Then the goddess transformed into Shariputra, said to Shariputra transformed into the goddess, Reverend Shariputra, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? And Shariputra, transformed into the goddess, replied, I no longer appear in the form of a male. My body has changed into the body of a woman. I do not know what to transform. So she's showing the relationality and the constructedness of embodiment by creating this magical illusion in his mind, which is only a substitute for the regular magical illusion of our discriminatory, ignorance-dominated minds, misknowledge-dominated minds. We think we're really this and that, but we're wrong, that's what she's saying. So the goddess continued, if the elder could again change out of the female state, then all women could also change out of their female states. All women appear in the form of women in just the same way as the elder appears in the form of a woman. While they are not women in reality, they appear in the form of women. With this in mind, the Buddha said, in all things there is neither male nor female, which doesn't mean that in the world of relative unreality there aren't males and females, but that means they're not ultimate conditions, and they're equally mutable between male and female. And therefore, male has a female possibility, female has a male possibility completely, and both embody both things in a way, really, you can say. And she shows him that viscerally by this sort of magician's, visionary thing, power which she has because of her enlightenment. She's completely connected to him. She's not really putting him down. She's kind of almost entering his mind and showing him the relativity of his body, that it's completely transformable, and showing him in a different body and herself in a different body, to overcome at a visceral level his sense of dualism, you see. And by seeing that, then she's getting him subliminally to question his rigid view that he's in a world of suffering, awful world, which at various points during the sutra he encounters, that even though he's personally attained what he thought was nirvana, and he was perfectly blissful in that state temporarily, but it was only temporary because it was only like a threshold attainment of nirvana. And the real one is only where you attain nirvana in the midst of all of this, in the midst of your interconnectivity with all beings, so that you are in a way, you are one with the nirvana that is their own true nature, and which makes you able, like a Buddha or a bodhisattva in the inconceivable liberation, to really help them realize that's their true nature themselves. How could you really help them do that unless you could initially experience their own reality as being that? So that's why she has the ability to make that magic. It isn't like an external manipulative thing, as if he's just someone she's trying to put down and do something. She's just trying to put him in her shoes in the most visceral sort of way. It would be like to say something about this moment, September 18th, 2018. The young woman, what was her name, Christine something, sitting in the hearing room, in case she happens to go there in the next few days, in the Congress, across from this Brett Kavanaugh, and he would see himself as her and herself as him. And so would all the senators. And they might finally come off their like partisan game of trying to conquer the Supreme Court for their own rigidities and stupidities, and realize that it's not possible that this person, without further penance, further education, should be in a position of arbitrating and deciding the fate of infinite numbers of cool heroines throughout the country. It was not proper. He is not a proper arbiter of justice, and it would be improper, and so therefore they would withdraw his nomination. So this is a very powerful example of really how cool heroism functions, by placing the person who thinks of them as departed in their shoes, by being able to do so, by being in the shoes and being truly loving. She's being truly loving to Shariputra. She's introducing Shariputra to the fluidity and flexibility and the nirvana-ishness of ordinary reality, the non-duality of nirvana and samsara is what she's really doing. And then there's a beautiful long exchange that she switches him back, and then she says, Shariputra, what have you done with your female form? And he says, I neither made it nor did I change it. And just so all things are neither made nor changed in reality. In unreality they seem to be, but they're not really that way. And that they are not made and not changed, that is the teaching of the Buddha. So that means that this show of relationality of separate beings banging into each other, fearing each other, being greedy for each other, harming each other, thinking they are really that way, all of that is something like a movie. It's like an unreal thing. And once you know that, though, then you, as part of it, you see it as a play of bliss, though. So then you don't just leave it. You don't think you can leave it. And you don't think that part of it, of the show, is that there's a place apart from it that's a great place. Its own nature is that place. You come to this which of course is inexpressible. So I'm expressing non-duality in some way. But there's the next chapter in Vimalkirti is where or 2 chapters later is where he shows how non-duality is inexpressible, actually. So this is the cool hero thing. So I'm just saying this and giving this commentary on this. Between the Vimalakirti and the goddess, between Shariputra and the goddess, and just so, Reverend Shariputra, it is impossible, she ends, that I should attain the perfect enlightenment of Buddhahood. Why? Because he's saying it's impossible that he could ever be an ordinary person, because he's had an experience of a certain kind of nirvana. a limited form of nirvana, but not the total, all-embracing one. But she says, that just so Reverend Short is impossible I should attain. So she says, well, you know, why? Because perfect enlightenment stands upon the impossible. Because it is impossible, no one attains the perfect enlightenment of Buddhahood. And then he argues back, he says, but the Tathagata has declared, the Tathagatas, that means the reality, the ones who have realized the nature of reality, the Tathagatas, which is the name of Buddhas, who are as numerous as the sands of the Ganges, have attained perfect Buddhahood, are attaining perfect Buddhahood, and will go on attaining perfect Buddhahood. Reverend Shariputra, the expression, the Buddhas of past, present, and future, is a conventional expression made up of a certain number of syllables. The Buddhas are neither past, nor present, nor future. Their enlightenment transcends the three times. But tell me, Elder, have you attained sainthood? And then Shariputra kind of gets it and said, it is attained because there is no attainment. And then she agrees with him, just so. There is perfect enlightenment because there is no attainment of perfect enlightenment, as if it were something separate from other things, you know. So then Vimalakirti says to Shariputra to calm him down. Shariputra, Reverend Shariputra, he always retreats him with great respect, even though he's challenged always in his vision of dualism. He says, Reverend Shariputra, this goddess has already served 92 billion Buddhas. She plays with the superknowledges. She has truly succeeded in all her vows. She has gained the tolerance of the birthlessness of all things. She has actually attained irreversibility. She can live wherever she wishes on the strength of her vow to develop living beings. So these are the cool heroines, which is all of you who unrealistically, but relatively, are existing as females. And you have been ignored, and your vision and your heroism has been ignored and is still being ignored. Even in our wonderful democratic, all beings are equal, all humans are equal. Actually, all beings are equal, but at least all humans are equal. And now you're going to make yourself heard, and you are going to get to the polls, every single one of you, and you're going to vote, and you're going to not vote for anyone who will not listen to your voice. And you're going to help clean up the imbalance that is afflicting our society, where some people are afflicted by the misery of too much wealth, and some people are afflicted by the misery, and more people are afflicted by the misery of too little wealth. But all of them are afflicted, actually. It isn't that we're against one for the other. We just want to rebalance things. And there might be some a little more wealthy and some a little less wealthy, there's no doubt. That's fine, we're not against that. But it shouldn't be so imbalanced, and no one should be really, really poor, and nobody should be impossibly wealthy. The only impossibly wealthy ones are the ones who see the whole universe as made of wealth. And live or die, they live in a jewel mandala. And those are enlightened ones. And those are impossibly wealthy, actually, perhaps. Nothing is impossible, so I shouldn't say that. And those people are impossibly wealthy, right? Because they identify with all life and all beings. And that's what you do more than the males. And therefore the males now need you to lead them out of their excessive rigidities and separations and discriminations and prejudices and biases and confusions. Okay? So cool heroism is here, and it must win now. And it has been winning, actually. And there are just certain ones who are so confused that they see their liberators as somehow imprisoners. And they therefore are fighting against that desperately, crazily. And it's time for them to lose and find the joy of the consolation of the joy of loss of false views, of loss of suffering, of loss of ignorance, greed, and anger. Okay? So all the best to all of you. Have a happy time. Thank you very much.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, including special tours with Robert Thurman and geographic expeditions, please visit tibethouse.us. Trips in 2019 include Sri Lanka.